Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota joining us now as a ninth vote is underway in the House. Senator, it's great to see you, sir. This is quite the debacle. Your reaction on Twitter struck a chord with a lot of Republicans and frankly, independents and Democrats alike.
Yeah.
Tell us what your reaction was and why you're so infuriated with what you're seeing.
Well, I'm very frustrated, and frankly, I'm embarrassed for some people who don't seem to be, they maybe seem too arrogant to be embarrassed for themselves. One of the things I've noticed, and I spent 6 years in the House, all 6 of them in the majority. I watched as some members, a small group, the Freedom Caucus at the time, drove John Boehner out of the speakership. I think in some respects, the same happened to Paul Ryan, who chose not to seek re-election. And I think what's happening is a number of these people have never served in the majority. They've only been in the minority. And we even heard a few of them the other day, confirmed by several news sources, say that they're comfortable having a Democratic Speaker of the House because they could fight him. Well, the difference between the minority and the majority oftentimes is the difference between fighting and governing. They demonstrate a willingness to fight, and I get that. I get that people want a fight. But at the end of the day, the responsibility and the burden on the majority, and frankly, the opportunity for the majority, is to govern. So I am frustrated that a small group are holding hostage at the mass, the 200. When 20, I think my tweet was something to the effect, when 20 people govern 200 against their will, that's not conservatism. That's chaos. And so we really do need to get Kevin in the speaker's chair and start governing because the country needs it.
Senator, it's Shauna here. It's good to see you. Are you optimistic that McCarthy is going to be able to get the votes he needs? And then going forward, if he does get those votes, do you think he's going to be able to unite the GOP within the House, given the fact that there are so many holdouts?
So your second question is the problematic question, I think. You can get to a point where you've given so much up to be a leader that you no longer lead. Mm-hmm. You no longer have the tools that you need as the speaker. Remember, the speaker of the entire House. You know, just a few weeks ago, I was one of the Republicans in the Senate that voted against the omnibus, or awful bus, as I like to call it, voted for the 6-week CR in hopes that Kevin McCarthy and the House Republicans could return us to regular order and bring a more conservative approach to the appropriations process. The concern that several people did have that voted for the omnibus, and even some of us that didn't, is that they wouldn't be able to govern. And sure enough, here we are. The easiest thing they're going to have to do this year, frankly, is pick a speaker. It doesn't get easier after that. When you talk about a debt ceiling increase coming up, keeping the government funded and open, providing enough resources for national defense, it's a big job, this governing thing. And I think they need to be about the business of doing that.
Former President Trump weighed in, urging the House to vote for Kevin McCarthy. It moved 0 votes. Yeah. You know a lot blame him for what happened in the Senate, the fact that Democrats did in fact hold. What does that say about his influence as we move forward?
Well, I think what it says, one of the things it says about his influence is that the group of people that he's talking to, who would, I think for the most part, you would align with Donald Trump, aren't really interested in listening to leaders. I thought Donald Trump's plea has been very statesmanlike, frankly. I think it's been solid. I think he makes a great point about stop playing games. This is serious business. Let's move on with governing with the Trump agenda, the America First agenda. But remember, this is not a philosophical fight. When you have Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who most people think are attached at the hip philosophically, on the opposite side of this issue, there's something else at play. What concerns me, guys, is that some people have confused their jobs with your jobs, or perhaps more accurately with Tucker Carlson or Laura Ingraham or Mark Levin, and they got to get over that. Mark Levin and Laura Ingraham aren't confused about the difference between their jobs, and they can't be either. So, am I optimistic about Kevin getting there? I'm optimistic about him getting there, but only if his people stand firm, if they're willing to go to 133 ballots or whatever the historical marker is, just like their opponents are, perhaps we get there. But what's more likely to happen is as there's some deterioration and some fatigue, Republicans, reasonable adult Republicans in the House, are going to have to look to Democrats. And that is not what I would think those 20 Republicans want to have happen. They've made their point. They've stood their ground. They've demonstrated their fight. Now they need to demonstrate their ability to govern.
Well, Senator, given the dysfunction that we currently are seeing within Congress right now, let's talk about some issues that you see both sides of the aisle able to agree on. We talked at length about crypto regulation in recent weeks. We talked about a crackdown when it comes to big tech. What are some of the issues that you see both sides being able to come to an agreement on?
Yeah, so in the Senate, the first thing I think we have to do is, and this is where the House can be very helpful, by the way, is get back to regular order. Once the House has a speaker, and they will, it will be a Republican, I'm confident. I think it's most likely Kevin McCarthy. But once that happens, then we have to start the process of governing in regular order. While I'm more than happy in the Senate to work with my Democratic friends, to get the ball rolling on a few issues such as immigration reform. I think a divided government, by the way, presents some opportunities here. Immigration reform, the border, dealing with the mandatory side of our ledger. Social Security, Medicare are facing insolvency in just a matter of years and not decades anymore. And these are challenges I think that both sides recognize, and I think they present opportunities. Permitting reform for infrastructure, whether it's energy infrastructure, whether it's green energy or fossil energy, transportation infrastructure, building more with less. All of these things help attack the overall economic challenge, while at the same time, I think presenting some opportunities to work across the aisle. But the first thing we have to do is get the House in order and start with some regular order so that we can have a committee structure and committee process that actually works.
Both parties have struggled with that immigration issue for 30 plus years. Shauna mentioned the possibility of crypto regulation, which is, of course, a hot topic because of FTX. Is there some agreement on that?
I think there can be. I'm on the banking committee. Every time I think I know what there is to know about cryptocurrency, I find out I don't, because something else happens. So getting our heads wrapped around it, I think, has been a challenge. I actually think, like a lot of things, the FTX situation sort of demonstrates some of the shortcomings, some of the challenges, and perhaps some of the opportunities for reasonable regulatory oversight, particularly as it relates to an exchange versus the currency itself or some of the other things. One of the problems we often have is that regulations are often an overreaction to a problem as opposed to just a correcting. So I want to be careful of that. But I do sense that there's certainly some bipartisan work. There's already been some work, on the Senate Banking Committee between Senator Gillibrand, a Democrat, of course, and Cynthia Lummis, Senator Lummis from Wyoming, a Republican who care about this issue. And we can approach it from different sides and meet someplace in the middle, which generally ends up with some pretty good policy.
All right, Senator. Well, I don't play party favorites, but when it comes to the FCS National Championship, I used to live in South Dakota. I know that's on Sunday. You can go ahead and give it a go, Bison, because that's a wonderful zip-up you're wearing there.
Well, let me just tell you that the Bison are playing for their 10th time in the last 12 years in the championship game, and I suspect they've never faced a challenge quite as big as this one against the Jackrabbits of South Dakota State. So good for the Dakotas. We'll see which half has the best team, but I'm saying go Bison, of course.
All right. Well, good luck to your Bison. Senator, great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.